everyone. So I want to take this opportunity to use our last assignment to go over some issues that came up for a bunch of you and address some kind of fundamental programming issues, actually, and concepts that some of you tried out in this assignment and also that are just really valuable for thinking about designing your Python work going forward. And so we're going to look at the fix or a fix for doing for addressing the pandas issue that we talked about in class. I also want to talk about function and variable scoping, how to write functions and scope variables properly, because that's what's really going to help your code be reusable, right? And reusable code is really where a lot of the power comes from, right? So instead of having to write, the same thing over and over again for different data sources, we want to make something that's flexible and reusable. So that we can really get some scale benefit out of it. So I have this sample program. You can see I'm importing pandas. I'm using pandas to read in the data. And then I've created this, this function that's supposed to calculate the mean. And down here, I am calling that function in order to print out the result. So we're just going to kind of step by step through this and troubleshoot as we go, which, by the way, is just the way to deal with troubleshooting. So let me just one second. Go ahead and go into my file here, and I'm just going to start by running this to see how it goes. So first things first, I have it says calculate mean is not defined, which of course is strange to me because I'm pretty sure I did define it. But if I come back here and look, this is often the case is spelling errors, right? So 99% of your errors are just going to be spelling issues. So having corrected that, I think, right, here's this calculate mean, but here it says something else. Another way to do that is I also strongly recommend you can use the hints that may pop up in your code editor, but you can also just copy and paste is a really good way to do that, right? Make sure that you're not introducing random typos. So now I'm going to check this. And what I'm saying is the mean of data.csv is function calculate mean at blah, blah, blah. Okay. This is actually a memory address because what's happened here is that although I have named my function, right, I've referred to the function, I haven't actually called it. So in the definition of my function, I say, look, you are going to need some ingredients. You're going to need data. In this case, of course, I intend that data to be whatever came in from my CSV. There are reasons why I don't actually want to give, we call this the local variable name, why I don't want that to be the same as this global variable name. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But basically, I have told the computer that there need to be ingredients. And rather than passing in any ingredients, I've just referred to the function itself, right? So I need to actually give it some ingredients if I want it to do anything. And as we noted, data. Now, data is also not a great variable name here because it's a little bit more generic. So I'm going to do that. And actually that has helped already with my naming issue. So I've created the variable my data and I'm going to pass my data. Now the local variable name is data. But I'll leave that alone for now so you can see what happens when I don't have it that way. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, so now I'm getting an error where it says in line 21, data total plus anum, right? So it's actually a pretty useful error message here. Unsupported operand types for plus, for the operator plus, int and string. So as we discussed in class, anytime, if you don't specify at the time that the data is read in, it's going to read in all data as strings. So I have to cast or convert my data value to actually a number. And I'm going to use float just for safety's sake because, I mean, I could use int here because having examined my data, I know that it's all integers. But in general, you want to allow for variation. This is also what's going to highlight the issue that we have with pandas, which is good to know about. So I do that. And now, as we discussed, this is actually not the correct answer. And the way that we can see this is hard to know if you're just doing this on your own, unless you were to independently test and kind of, use a calculator or something to add up those values. But if I actually go to print commented it out to begin with, right? If I actually go to print those values, you can see that even before I've cast it as a float, Pandas has added these random decimal points, right? And so if I look at my data source, I see that actually it's all integers. So what the hell is going on? As we discussed, there's this thing called type promotion that happens when you don't have a header in Pandas, but you haven't told it that you don't have a header. And so what I need to do here is actually say, by the way, there's no header on this file. And that's going to solve some problems and introduce some other ones. But it's all in service of getting to where we want to go. So saying that header equals none, I now come back. Now I have a different issue. I don't seem to be getting my data values anymore, right? I'm actually just getting 0 through 49, which I guess is helpful because it tells me how many elements there are in my data set, but not going to give me the correct mean either. So now what I want to do is I want to know, what does my data actually look like, right? So I'm actually just going to print my data frame as it has been imported. So I can see sort of like what Python thinks it is, what Pandas thinks it is. Okay, and what I see here is that actually I just have one row, which is what I expect. I have one row, and then each column has been given a header that is an integer. Now, this gives me a clue. This gives me an idea. There's obviously any number of ways to solve this. I could transpose this and reset the index, but I am a simplicity lover. And therefore, what I'm going to do is just say, look, if data is one single row and each column is named for an integer, I know that enum is giving me that correct number of integers, right? And so I'm just going to say, look, give me data, the value that is data at the index enum, right? We saw when we did that printout previously that it went 0 through 49. Well, those are the values that I want to try and get. So let's see how we do here. And it's giving us some extra information, but in fact, it is giving us the correct value, right? So each time it's just saying, right, it's 99, it's 0, whatever. Maybe I still have my print statement on data up. Oh yeah, I still have my print statement on data. So this will be a little easier to see if I get rid of that. Nope, never mind, it's coming anyway, because I was just getting them both, right? So this is kind of a quick and dirty way to deal with this, right? This is perhaps not so Pythonic, perhaps not so Pandas friendly, but it does solve our problem. It gives us the correct answer. And we're doing so, we're solving this problem with a function, which is super handy. Address here is this issue of scoping. So when you have something that's sort of at the top, and when I say at the top, what I mean is it is completely just leftified. Okay, so that means that it is global. We call those global variables. So anytime I have a variable declared that is all the way justified to the left, that's going to be a global variable. What does that mean? That means that this variable data can be quote unquote seen. It is visible to everything in here. Oh, actually, there's another problem we need to solve first, but let's talk about scoping. Pause on the scoping. We have this other problem here, which is that I have a magic number. This is what we call a magic number because it is hard coded in. This will work only with this precise data set that happens to have 50 elements or some data set that happens to have 50 elements. Obviously, I don't want to do that. I have any number of ways that I can solve this. I am not using length, right? That was one of the assignment requirements. So I'm going to say num elements equals 0, right? And while I'm within my loop, I'm just going to add 1 to it. Right? Again, not a super sophisticated way to do this, but just thinking about how to solve these problems, right? And so at the end of this, have this. Let's see, maybe I screw something up. And let's see how this does. Nope, it's good. So you'll notice the other thing that I did is I changed the indentation level on the average. So before, when this was indented 1, this was being recalculated every single time through the loop. And it just happens that the final value of average was the correct one, right? I mean, because the final thing that I did was I took the total, the last loop through and returned it. But really, I don't want to calculate the average until I'm done. And that's why I've created data total and num elements outside of that loop. And so now I'm getting the correct thing. I could print num elements just to double check. Right? And I should see 50 underneath that. Right? And that's what I expect. So now I have a fully flexible function. That is what I want, because I don't know that I'm always going to have the same number of elements in another data set that looks basically like the one that I have currently. So back to function scoping and variable naming. There is an issue that can come up if I have a global variable that has the same name as something I'm referencing locally. And that issue is, so right now I'm only calling this once. But what if I want to use it twice in the same file? Use this twice in the same file. So I can do that by just saying, look, I'm going to pass you something different. So I actually have a second CSV. It is just the same, the original CSV with 5 fewer elements. I took the 5 off the end. And what I want to see is, does this work correctly if I create another variable called data2? Let's find out. Okay, so this is actually going to work correctly, but it's going to be very confusing to read. And the reason why is, if I look at this, right, what I see here is I see data, and then I see data here, and therefore I see data here and here. And the question that this raises in my mind is, which one is actually being referenced within this function. So in general, it's always a good idea, if you define any variable name that you use globally, you want to make sure that you change the name of the local variable to be different, right? And again, I'm pretty agnostic about how you do this. You can use camel case, you can use underscores, but you want to make sure that you customize that so that it's very clear that my data refers to the local variable and data refers to the global variable, which is being passed in. And then I can use it for data2, et cetera, et cetera. But otherwise, you can get into real trouble with, sometimes depending on how you set it up, the program won't be able to tell the difference, and you'll actually just, once again, get the wrong answer. So for the sake of readability, which is very, very important as we discussed, you always want to make sure that you don't reuse variable names between global and so-called local variables. Those local variables are the names that you give to functions, that you give to variables within functions. So hopefully this makes sense. Let's just run this one more time, make sure we haven't destroyed anything, and it looks pretty good. So I hope this has been a little bit helpful. Obviously happy to take questions on this in class this week, and address anything else that comes up. But I wanted to sort of offer this to all of you, to explain a few more concepts that I think you're going to find useful